Thomas was finishing up his lunch when his phone buzzed. The number looked familiar. It was from his hometown. He picked up, not expecting the news that would change everything. "Your grandfather's house is being torn down." The voice belonged to Mrs. Patel, their old neighbor from back home. Thomas nearly dropped his phone. "What? That's impossible. I own that house," he said, his heart racing. His mind flashed back to all those summer days he'd spent there as a kid. The house wasn't anything fancy, just a simple 2-story building with faded blue paint and a porch that creaked when you stepped on it. But to Thomas, it was everything. It was where his grandfather had taught him to plant tomatoes in the backyard garden, where they'd sit together on hot summer nights, his grandfather telling stories about coming to America with nothing but hope and determination. After his grandfather died 5 years ago, Thomas had inherited the house. He'd meant to visit more often, but work had taken him overseas. The house had stood empty, waiting for him to return. "Some lady in a fancy suit showed up with bulldozers this morning," Mrs. Patel continued. "They've already knocked down the garage and part of the back wall." Thomas felt sick. Inside that house were photo albums dating back 3 generations, his grandmother's handwritten recipes, the wooden chest his grandfather had carved by hand. These weren't just things, they were his family's story. "I'm coming home," Thomas said firmly. "Right now." He booked the first flight available, his mind racing during the entire journey. Who would do this? How could they even think they had the right? The taxi from the airport took him straight to the house. When he saw it, Thomas felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Half the house was gone, reduced to broken wood and scattered bricks. Dust filled the air. Construction equipment stood around like giant yellow monsters. And there she was, a woman in an expensive-looking suit, checking something on her clipboard. She had that look of someone who was used to getting her way. When she spotted Thomas staring at the ruins of his childhood memories, she walked over with confident steps. "Can I help you?" she asked, not really sounding like she wanted to help at all. "This is my house," Thomas said, his voice shaking with anger. "Or what's left of it." The woman, Karen, as she soon introduced herself, looked Thomas up and down. She seemed to decide he wasn't worth worrying about. "Well, not anymore," she said with a small laugh. "I purchased this property legally. If you have concerns, you can contact my office." She turned away, clearly thinking the conversation was over. She had no idea who she was dealing with. No idea at all. Thomas took a deep breath and pulled out his phone. "Mrs. Patel," he said when she answered, "I need you to call everyone. I'm going to need help." He looked at the woman directing the destruction of his family home and narrowed his eyes. "And I'm going to need a lawyer." Thomas didn't sleep that night. He sat on Mrs. Patel's porch, watching the ruins of his grandfather's house across the street. The moon cast shadows through the half-collapsed roof. Parts of the walls still stood like broken teeth against the night sky. Morning came too soon. Thomas walked across the street, stepping carefully over broken bricks and splintered wood. He picked up a small photo frame with cracked glass. Inside was a faded picture of his grandparents on their wedding day. His throat tightened. "You can't be here." "This is a construction site," a man in a hard hat called out. "This is my property," Thomas said quietly, tucking the photo into his pocket. The worker looked uncomfortable. "Look, I just follow orders. The boss lady said this place was bought fair and square." More trucks arrived. Workers poured out carrying tools. Thomas stood his ground as they worked around him, pretending not to see him. He called the local police, but they seemed confused by the paperwork Karen showed them. "Seems like everything's in order," the officer told Thomas with a shrug. "Property disputes are civil matters anyway." By noon, Thomas had gathered some neighbors. Old Mr. Wilson brought chairs. Mrs. Patel brought sandwiches and coffee in a thermos. They formed a small line in front of what remained of the house. "What is this?" Karen's voice cut through the air as she marched toward them. Her heels sank slightly into the soft dirt. "You're trespassing on a work site." "We're standing on the sidewalk," Thomas replied calmly. "Public property." Karen's face tightened. She pulled out her phone. "I'll have security remove you." "Go ahead," Thomas said. "While you're at it, maybe you can explain how you got the deed to a house that legally belongs to me." Karen laughed, but Thomas noticed it sounded forced. "Your grandfather sold this property months ago. The paperwork is clear." "My grandfather has been dead for 5 years," Thomas said loud enough for the workers to hear. Some of them paused, looking over. Karen's smile faltered. "Well, someone sold it, and I have the signatures to prove it." "Forged signatures," Thomas said, "and I can prove that." A news van pulled up. Thomas had called them too. A reporter jumped out with a camera person following close behind. "What's happening here?" the reporter asked, microphone ready. Before Karen could speak, Thomas stepped forward. "I'm Thomas Chen. Yesterday I was working overseas. Today I'm watching a developer illegally demolish my family home using fake documents." The camera turned to Karen, whose face had gone pale. She backed away. "This is ridiculous. I don't have to listen to this." But people were listening. Neighbors had come out of their houses. Workers had stopped working. The news camera was rolling. "Turn those machines off," Karen snapped at the workers. "We'll continue tomorrow when this situation is resolved." As she stormed off to her shiny car, Thomas turned to the reporter. "I have quite a story to tell you," he said, "and it's only just beginning." The news story spread quickly. By evening, Thomas's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Old friends, distant relatives, even his former high school teacher called to ask if he needed help. Thomas set up a small folding table on the sidewalk the next morning. He brought coffee, donuts, and most importantly, a stack of papers: the original deed to the house, his grandfather's will, property tax receipts from the past 5 years. "You're becoming quite the local celebrity," Mrs. Patel said, handing him a newspaper. There he was on the front page. "Man returns to find family home demolished." Karen's car pulled up at exactly 9 a.m. She stepped out wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy day, flanked by a tall man in an expensive suit. "My lawyer, Mr. Peterson," she said curtly, not bothering with a greeting. The lawyer looked down at Thomas's folding table and smirked. "This is all very dramatic, but it changes nothing. Ms. Westfield has legal ownership of this property." Thomas took a sip of his coffee. "Interesting. Would you like to explain how she bought it from my grandfather 5 years after he died?" "Clerical error in the date," the lawyer said smoothly. "The sale was obviously before his passing." "Then why have I been paying property taxes on it?" Thomas pulled out the receipts. "And why does his will, filed with the county, clearly leave it to me?" The lawyer's smile faded slightly. "There seems to be some confusion. Perhaps we can discuss a settlement. Ms. Westfield is prepared to be generous." Karen stepped forward. "Look, I didn't know about your grandfather. Someone brought this property to me as an investment opportunity. I'm the victim here too." Thomas raised his eyebrows. "The victim? Half my family's history is under that pile of rubble, and you're the victim?" "Business is business," Karen said, her voice hardening. "I've invested over $200,000 already. I'm not walking away from that." "I don't expect you to," Thomas replied calmly. "I expect you to pay for damages, emotional distress, and trespassing. My lawyer will be in touch with the exact figure." Karen laughed. "Your lawyer? You have a card table and some old papers." Thomas smiled for the first time since arriving home. "Actually, I have a bit more than that." He handed Karen a business card. Her face changed as she read it. "Chen International Law? You're that Thomas Chen?" "The very same," Thomas said. "Property law is actually my specialty. Interesting coincidence, isn't it?" The lawyer took the card from Karen's suddenly trembling hands. His face went pale. "Ms. Westfield, we should continue this conversation in private." As they hurried back to their car, Mrs. Patel turned to Thomas. "What was that about? Who do they think you are?" Thomas watched their car speed away. They just realized they picked the wrong house to demolish. He folded up his card table, and the wrong person to mess with. Thomas spent the next day in the local library, digging through property records. The librarian, an older woman with gray hair and kind eyes, helped him navigate the county's online database. "Something's not right here," Thomas muttered, pointing at the screen. "Look at this deed transfer. The signature doesn't match my grandfather's." The librarian leaned closer. "And the notary stamp? I know all the notaries in town. This one doesn't exist." Thomas took photos of everything with his phone. Later, at Mrs. Patel's kitchen table, he spread out all the documents he'd gathered. The fake deed, the rushed demolition permit, the hastily approved construction plans. "It's not just my house," Thomas realized as he connected the dots. "Karen's company has bought 6 properties in this neighborhood in the last year, all from owners who moved away or—" His voice trailed off. "Or passed away," Mrs. Patel finished softly. "Like your grandfather." Thomas nodded grimly. "And all? The paperwork has the same notary stamp. The fake one." A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mr. Wilson from across the street. "You need to see this," he said, handing Thomas a folder. "My brother works at City Hall. He found something interesting about your friend Karen." Inside was a stack of papers showing campaign donations from Karen's company to the mayor and 2 council members. All 3 had voted to approve her building projects, including the one on Thomas's property. "This goes deeper than I thought," Thomas said, adding the papers to his growing pile of evidence. That evening, Thomas walked back to what remained of his grandfather's house. The machinery stood silent in the fading light. Yellow tape marked the area as a construction zone. He ducked under it, walking carefully through the rubble. In what used to be the living room, Thomas spotted something gleaming in the dirt. He bent down and picked up his grandmother's old silver teapot, dented but somehow still intact. Next, to it lay a wooden box he recognized immediately, his grandfather's special box where he kept important papers. Thomas brushed off the dust and opened it. Inside were more documents, the real deed to the house, insurance papers, and most importantly, letters between his grandfather and the city about refusing offers to buy the property. He never wanted to sell, Thomas whispered to himself. He wanted this house to stay in the family. As he stood there holding the box, his phone rang. It was his old friend Lee, now working at the district attorney's office. "Thomas, I looked into that woman like you asked," Lee said. "Karen Westfield. She's got a history of shady deals. 2 complaints filed against her in other counties, but they were dropped suddenly. Probably paid people off." "Not this time," Thomas said firmly. "This time she messed with the wrong family." Thomas took one last look around the ruins of his childhood home. In the light of the setting sun, he made a promise. "I'm going to make this right, Grandpa. And I'm going to make sure she never does this to anyone else." As he stood there holding the box, his phone rang. It was his old friend Lee, now working at the district attorney's office. "Thomas, I looked into that woman like you asked," Lee said. "Karen Westfield. She's got a history of shady deals, 2 complaints, filed against her in other counties, but they were dropped suddenly. Probably paid people off." "Not this time," Thomas said firmly. "This time she messed with the wrong family." Thomas took one last look around the ruins of his childhood home. In the light of the setting sun, he made a promise. "I'm going to make this right, Grandpa, and I'm going to make sure she never does this to anyone else." 3 days later, a sleek black car pulled up in front of Mrs. Patel's house. Thomas straightened his tie as he walked out to meet his colleagues. "The team is here," he told Mrs. Patel, who was peeking through the curtains. "Don't worry, we're going to fix this." 4 people stepped out of the car carrying briefcases and laptops. They followed Thomas inside, quickly turning Mrs. Patel's living room into a makeshift office. "This is everything I've found so far," Thomas said, pointing to his wall of evidence. Photos, documents, and sticky notes all connected with red string. "We need to move fast before she tries to continue the demolition." His colleague Raj nodded, already typing on his laptop. "I've checked her company records. She's got 5 other projects just like this one, all on properties with suspicious paperwork." "And look at this," added Lynn, another team member. The same 3 city officials approved all her permits in record time. Always the same 3. Thomas's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lee at the district attorney's office. "Meeting set for tomorrow. Bring everything you have." That evening, the local news ran another story about the demolition. This time, they interviewed other homeowners who had lost their properties to Karen's company under questionable circumstances. The reporter mentioned that international property law expert Thomas Chen was investigating the case. The next morning, Thomas's phone rang. It was Karen. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. "You're ruining my reputation with these lies." "They're not lies if they're true," Thomas replied calmly. "And I have the evidence to prove it. Listen." Karen's voice softened suddenly. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I'm a businesswoman. You're a businessman. We can work something out. Name your price." Thomas thought about his grandfather, who had worked 2 jobs for 15 years to buy that house, who had planted a garden in the backyard and taught Thomas how to grow tomatoes. "It was never about money," he said quietly. "It was about doing what's right." He hung up and turned to his team. "She's getting nervous, that's good." At the district attorney's office, Thomas laid out all the evidence, the forged documents, the fake notary stamp, the questionable donations, to city officials. "This is more than just civil fraud," the district attorney said, flipping through the files. "This is criminal. We're talking forgery, corruption, maybe even bribery." As they walked out of the meeting, Lynn turned to Thomas. "You could have taken her money, you know. Settled this quietly." Thomas shook his head. "My grandfather taught me something important," he said. "When someone tries to take what's yours, you don't just protect yourself. You make sure they can't do it to anyone else." Back at Mrs. Patel's house, Thomas looked out the window at the remains of his grandfather's home across the street. For the first time since arriving, he smiled. The tables had turned. Karen had thought she was dealing with just another absent homeowner. Instead, she'd picked a fight with someone who had spent his life fighting for people just like his grandfather. The courthouse was packed on Monday morning. Thomas arrived early with his legal team, all of them carrying thick folders of evidence. On the other side of the room, Karen sat with 3 expensive-looking lawyers. She avoided looking at Thomas. "All rise," the bailiff called as the judge entered. Judge Lopez was known for being tough but fair. She peered over her glasses at both sides. "I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. This is a serious case with serious allegations. Let's proceed." Karen's lead lawyer stood up first. He was tall with perfectly combed hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your Honor, my client is a respected businesswoman. These accusations are simply a misunderstanding between buyer and seller. We have documentation showing a legal purchase." Thomas's lawyer, Raj, stood next. "Your Honor, we have evidence proving those documents are forged, not just for Mr. Chen's property, but for 5 others in the same neighborhood." For hours, both sides presented their cases. Karen's lawyers tried to paint her as a victim of bad paperwork. Thomas's team methodically laid out their evidence: the fake notary stamps, the impossibly dated signatures, the suspicious timing of campaign donations. During a break, Thomas stepped into the hallway for some air. A group of elderly neighbors from his grandfather's street were sitting on a bench. They had all come to support him. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "We believe in you," Mrs. Patel whispered, squeezing his hand. "Your grandfather would be so proud." Back in the courtroom, it was time for Karen to testify. She took the stand looking confident, but Thomas noticed she kept twisting her ring, a nervous habit. "Ms. Westfield," Raj began, "can you explain how you purchased Mr. Chen's property from his grandfather 5 years after he passed away?" Karen cleared her throat. "I never met the seller personally. My assistant handled the paperwork." "Convenient," Raj said. "And did your assistant also handle the paperwork for these other properties?" He held up files for 5 more homes. "All with the same notary stamp? A notary who, according to state records, doesn't exist?" Karen's face paled. She looked to her lawyers for help, but they were frantically flipping through papers. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Westfield, are you aware that filing fraudulent property documents is a felony in this state?" The room fell silent. Karen's confident mask crumbled. I need to speak with my lawyers." Judge Lopez wasn't having it. "Answer the question, Ms. Westfield." In that moment, Thomas watched Karen make a decision. Her shoulders slumped as she realized her scheme was exposed. "It wasn't just me," she said quietly. "There were others involved. People at City Hall who approved the permits. People who helped create the documents." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge banged her gavel for order. "In light of this testimony," Judge Lopez said, "I'm ordering an immediate halt to all construction activities by Ms. Westfield's company. All properties in question will be returned to their rightful owners pending the outcome of this case." For the first time in days, Thomas felt he could breathe again. This wasn't over yet, but it was a start. Justice was finally coming. 6 months later, Thomas stood on the freshly cut grass in front of his rebuilt home. It looked almost exactly like his grandfather's house. The same blue paint, the same porch with steps that creaked just a little. But it was stronger now, built to last another generation. "Looks just like I remember it," Mrs. Patel said, bringing over a plate of cookies for the small gathering of neighbors. "Your grandfather would be so happy." The court case had ended better than anyone expected. Karen and 3 city officials were facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and corruption. The other homeowners who had lost their properties to Karen's schemes were getting their land back too. "When's the hearing for Karen's sentencing?" asked Mr. Wilson, accepting a cookie. "Next month," Thomas replied. "Her lawyers are still trying to make deals, but the district attorney isn't budging. Too many people were hurt by what she did." Thomas had used the settlement money to not just rebuild his grandfather's house, but to start a community legal aid office to help others facing similar situations. He'd hired 2 young lawyers who worked there full-time while he split his time between international cases and helping his hometown. "Mail's here," called Lynn, who had decided to stay in town and work at the new legal office. She handed Thomas a large envelope. Inside was a letter from a small town in the next state. Another developer using the same tactics. Another family about to lose their home. "Looks like we have more work to do," Thomas said, passing the letter to Lynn. As the Aki afternoon sun began to set, Thomas walked to the backyard. The garden was still new, just small green shoots poking through the soil. He had planted tomatoes just like his grandfather taught him. Next to them was a young cherry tree, barely taller than Thomas himself. He knelt down and adjusted the small marker at the base of the tree. It read, "In memory of David Chen, who taught us to stand up for what's right." From his pocket, Thomas pulled out the old silver teapot he'd found in the rubble. He'd had it repaired, the dents hammered out, the tarnish polished away. It gleamed in the golden evening light. Mrs. Patel joined him, looking at the small tree. "Your grandfather always said that tree would outlive us all. Now this new one will do the same." Thomas nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Later, sitting on his new front porch as neighbors chatted and shared stories about his grandfather, Thomas felt a sense of peace wash over him. The house wasn't just a building. It was a legacy. His grandfather had fought to make a home here, and Thomas had fought to protect it. And in fighting for his home, he'd helped others save theirs too. That was worth more than any international case he'd ever won. That was the real victory. From somewhere nearby, Thomas could almost hear his grandfather's voice. "Always remember where you come from and always help others find their way home."